welcome to our disc guidance this holiday Friday. We are having a look at our new Kagebot. The new character is out, and so is our bot. And in fact, you can already find him at 2-mk.org/kage-bot. But now we're going to go through using him, how he's built, and the general experience, and how to make the most of him. So in order to do that, I have Rillian here, and we'll show you the ropes.
In terms of inputs, our Kagebot is middle of the road. I would say it's difficult to do, but it is more so a matter of observing what has been done in relation to other inputs and verifying that it's exactly as you wish it. So let's go through these inputs briefly. Once again, these are already on our website. Normally when we give these within a disc guidance stream, it is at least partially with the intention of people being able to try them out beforehand. So we're a bit specific about them, but in this case we're actually just going to go through and more so explain why they're that way, since you could already get the exact inputs if you go to the Kagebot page. The first input is stand heavy punch with a dash hidden in it, a V trigger activation, and this one is special because it's a little more difficult than we normally have done in that you must hold just the heavy punch relative to the whole V trigger activation. One decently easy way to do this is to set one button to heavy punch, one that you can hold fairly easily. Since the beginning of the input isn't that difficult, you're just going to be hitting one button. Doesn't need to be done along with anything else. So you can set a shoulder button if you use pad, or whichever button is most convenient on stick if you use stick. But rather than using your heavy kick button, you use a button set to V trigger as a whole. The difficulty of this one is generally therefore that you have to release the heavy punch, then press and hold it again. But if you find yourself plinking, it's usually okay, because if you tend to plink with the, let's say, face button on the controller as the first, or anything actually will tend to work out. You can see from many of our recordings that if the heavy punch comes a little before the V trigger, as long as he actually V triggers, it's fine. The important thing is to hold the heavy punch through a half circle forward motion. And this half circle forward motion is ended with what we call an edge shift. Basically, you're hitting the end recording button as if it is an attack button that you'd want to do a move with. If you do this fast enough, you should be able to get the required inputs. This is important because he needs to be able to do a lot of moves, and the moves require this setup. For his action 2, you will probably want to set a button to light punch plus medium punch, as this is the first thing you must press and you have to hold it. So once again, probably setting a shoulder button or a convenient button on stick to light punch plus medium punch, which is now a thing the game lets you set. And you can use our first frame trick, specifically set the button input as the method of recording rather than automatic, but still place the timer at 1. This allows you enough time to put the character in a crouching position, because in this case we will be holding 1 down back. You can hold that and it will not be recorded until you press a button, but with the button it will record it as that. So it will record it as 1, i.e. down back, light punch plus medium punch. You're holding this button, and the important thing about this input is that you must combo a back heavy punch from it. This can only be done at minimum range. You can mash it a little bit and it's fine. Then the hard part from there is to dash from this, or rather, to hide a dash in the animation of that heavy punch, a forward dash. And then very quickly do another half circle forward. If you find that you're the sort of person that has trouble with anti-airs, or you play a grappler, you may want this half circle forward to go all the way up to the jump forward, i.e. the 9 input. But you need to do this very quickly. You need to end that 9 input so fast that if you turn on action 1 and 2, and action 2 plays first and transitions into action 1, he should throw a grounded Hadouken. This is super important because if you do not do this, he will definitely jump in ways that don't help you rather than just jumping more. If you find this very difficult to do, you can actually do without this jump. It's not that necessary for him. It helps more if you play a grappler because it gives him higher chances to jump out of your command grabs and similar. Getting all of this done in time and making sure that you held the light punch plus medium punch from the very beginning of the input can be a little tricky, but when you play it back, you should be able to tell because he will mostly just hit back heavy punch and dash around maybe. The medium punch and light punch, as with all fully held inputs, will just disappear into itself. Similarly, he will be able to use an EX Hadouken using that input going the other way, and you'll be able to tell the difference between the two of them. His action 3 is his easiest input. You just have to hold any down direction, preferably down forward, i.e. 3, but 1 also works depending on the way that you personally find most comfortable to then transition into a Shoryuken style motion. Your Shoryuken does not have to be clean, you just have to make sure that it is fast. So, while you are holding this down forward or down back, you're using the same button input trick. And pressing and holding the V-skill button. Again, set the V-skill button to whatever you need. This is an easy input because the only thing you are doing is pressing and holding that V-skill button and very quickly doing the Shoryuken motion. Make sure that you get at least a forward and that you did not end up using some weird input shortcut that did not involve forward. If you go all the way back to forward, it probably is okay, but a perfect Shoryuken is obviously the best thing you can get here. As long as you've held this correctly, when played back, he will basically do his V-skill once, he will charge this V-skill when he uses it, and then just wiggle forward a little bit. If you combine it with other actions, he should be able to do both his critical art and just general Shoryukens, depending on how much meter he has and other things. You can test this with action 1 or action 2 really. You can tell if this one is wrong because he will have trouble doing the critical art, or he will do a Shoryuken and cancel the Shoryuken into a critical art, which generally means that he would not do it mid-screen or in wake-up situations quite often enough. But if this is difficult, you can usually get away with just this. You don't have to stress too much about whether or not he does cancel from an uppercut. This matters more for, again, grapplers, because the heavy uppercut will not be as invincible. It'll often be the heavy that he uses, and similar problems pop up. So do your best to get the cleanest Shoryuken you can, using whatever starting direction suits you the best. The only thing is that it should be a crouching one for difficult to explain other reasons. And I don't feel the need to go into it there, as most people will just try to get it correct. His action 4 requires more button setting, but you don't have to hold any buttons this time. You're just looking for two buttons that are easy to hit together. Set one to triple punch, the other to triple kick, and you're aiming to get all of these together. You're again using the button input trick and recording this while the character is walking forward. Interestingly, when you hit all buttons together while holding forward, it does not result in taunt, as some people might expect, but rather results in a throw. As soon as this throw starts, hold up forward for a very short time, then do a motion that is effectively going from forward to down and back up to forward again. This input is both strange and difficult. The reason for its timing is that for some reason in the game currently, and if you're watching this video after some changes have been made, you may need to adjust this. For whatever reason, Kage's inputs get shifted when he's doing a forward throw. In other words, the game, at some point during his forward throw, changes what it believes forward and back are. Meaning that you have to find a specific timing within this throw that this happens. Our goal here is that when you're done, the input actually becomes a half circle backward. But if you actually input a half circle backward, because of this switch, it will end up playing back as what is effectively a messy shoryuken, which we do not want here. This seems to be a little more lenient than we thought. Hopefully it will not be too hard to do. Just do it a little slower than you normally would for a shoryuken, and hopefully you will be able to find the precise and perfect timing for this. Of course, as always, you are ending the recording with the button as if it is the final button of an attack input. So basically as if you were doing a Hadouken with the end recording button. And if all this works out, you should have an input that allows him to jump, that allows him to occasionally flash, to appear to be doing his air tatsu, and generally when working along with other buttons can allow things like his red fireball Shakunetsu Hadouken. If you really don't want him to jump at all, and you didn't put the jump in the other one, then there's no need to put a jump here, as this is a little difficult to get in terms of the timing anyway. It can be stressful, and if you find that this input is stressing you out in terms of actually recording it, you can do just a forward to down, down to forward motion, and it just takes a slight delay after he begins the throw. We do not actually suggest this. This is one of the bots that is not particularly improved by reducing the amount it jumps. Certain bots is better to have the jump in if you have trouble anti-airing, but if your character doesn't anti-air that much, or has a really powerful anti-air, you would want less jumping. We don't suggest this for Kagebot. Even if your character has a good anti-air, unless you are completely focused on the Kage ground game, you should probably put this jump in. If you're going to leave out a jump, leave out the one mentioned in Action 2, as it's harder to input by most people anyway. And finally, Action 5, a crouching, we suggest down back, medium punch. You are not holding this medium punch. It's just a tap as standard. You can often combo the next input off of this, which is a stand light punch, and another stand light punch. Doesn't always combo, but you don't really need to worry about that part, because the key here is not working out whether or not this combos, the key here is being able to input the first half of the Shungokusatsu critical art input. Light punch, forward, light kick. This ends with a heavy punch, and you can guess that the heavy punch that will provide this move is the one in action 1. But the timing for this can be quite difficult. Fortunately for us, in this case, there's no delay on the one from action 1, assuming we did the button input style for there instead of automatic. So you don't have any delay. The question is purely about how quickly you can end the recording, basically treating the end recording button as the last input required for the Shungokusatsu. You may want to practice this move on your own. If you're not familiar with it, the timing can be a little rough. But once you've got it, it's relatively easy to test, as he doesn't take too long to do it if you just leave action 1 and action 5 on, and you can just watch him until he does it, and if you realize he's not doing it, going from 5 to 1, then you probably need to fix something. So with that, we move on to actually fighting it and getting something out of this. This bot is a combination between our bots for helping you train your meaty attacks and our bots for helping you train your meaty and meter awareness. The settings for the bot are: the player gets whatever they want for their gauges, really, because you're testing, again, meaties, punishes, mental space. In fact, even at higher difficulty levels, for the most part you don't change this. It's only when you get to the extreme difficulty level that you set your gauges to normal, because it pushes on your awareness even more. The bot gets auto recover on both its V gauge and its CA gauge to maximize the amount of damage it can do and the amount of stress that you can be put under. You can change this, but since most of the time you're not really looking to figure out whether or not the bot has enough meter to do something, Kage is not the style of character where this comes up too often. You can leave them at full, and it will help quite a bit more. This bot is generally used with V-Trigger 2 and is designed around it for the most part, though it will work basically fine with V-Trigger 1, as that V-Trigger is more of a confirmation thing. Whether or not V-Trigger 1 works well is more so up to your opponent than you. There's nothing specific to defend. If your opponent did the right thing, most of the time you're either going to die because it's a nearly unblockable setup, or you're already getting hit and it's just a question of whether or not you fall out of it. Therefore, there's no truly successful way to play against the bot in the sense of, can I do this absolutely perfectly with no chance of getting hurt, just do everything right? There's always an element of randomness here because that is the point of it mentally. The point system is therefore built around this. As always, the goal is to get to 10 points without losing all your health. And the first point is quite obvious: crush, counter, Shoryuken. If you're used to our Shoto style bots, you often realize that this is a point because they all have slightly different movements, and it's therefore important to be able to recognize when in the timing you should do this, and so on. Secondarily, Kage in particular has a move that looks very much like a crush counterable Shoryuken, i.e. his critical art, that is not in fact crush counterable at all, meaning that you have to use a separate punish for it. The second point here is actually very difficult, and this is intentional. It requires you to neutral jump when you see Kage do his EX stomp kick. Now, this is borderline unreactable. This is super hard to do for most people. But the point is more so to put you in a particular mindset than a huge expectation that this will be a good thing all of the time. Sometimes you will find yourself jumping early, and a lot of the time that will be completely fine. If you jump really early, it will often be obvious, and otherwise it's just helpful. He has other EX moves that he does use from close, and the misleading aspect is meant to help you realize just how much your awareness can be stressed by this character. The other reason is that if you try to neutral jump it, if you force yourself to try to react by jumping, you will also learn to react by stand blocking if you're the type that often crouch blocks. But the move is effectively escapable in this way, and you get a big punish for doing so. So the point system is in fact to do this and then punish with a full neutral jump combo. Now, as mentioned, this is a bot about helping you practice and understand your meaty attacks, your Oki. So the third point system C, is just to land those. However, the meaties in question here are a bit more limited than against some of our other bots related to this. He's a little more difficult than Lara. You only get the point for the meaty if it was from a knockdown that you got because of his critical art or basically any other part of the point system. So you do a punish on Shoryuken, crush counter punish, full combo punish, and then you go for the meaty from that. So technically it means you should get 2 points, at least at the easy levels. 1 point for crush counter punishing the Shoryuken and 1 point for the meaty. However, since there is some randomness involved here, you may of course just get uppercutted, get wake up Shungokusatsu, wake up critical art of some other kind. He has some definite options, and you moving in with your meaty attack is important. We're aiming here for mostly mix-ups, not just lockdown meaties, but lockdown meaties are fine if your character is mostly one that just has those. The final point is, again, part of the reason why we suggest only V-Trigger 2 here, although you can play the bot without this and just never be able to use Point System D. Neutral jump or back jump, depending on the spacing and situation, to punish the Shungokusatsu. Depending on where he is on the screen, how he cancelled out of it, how much block stun the move he did before it had, and so on, this may become weird, but it's generally not too difficult to do. Difficulty comes in the awareness of whether or not you should jump backward or jump straight up. It's basically teaching you not to punish this move with simple things and not to panic when you see it. As the difficulty goes up, obviously, there are less points for things like the crush counter punish on the Shoryuken, but you still have to do them because you still have to do them before you can get the point for the meaty. So, we will have Hansuki Dynasty demonstrate a bit on Karin, and then start to go through some other characters and talk about things relative to that. So once again, in short, Every time she either does a crush counter punish, neutral jumps out of his stomp, or punishes Shungokusatsu with a jump, that is 1 point. And every time she does a meaty after doing any of those things is another point. The bot does have most of the abilities of Kage, so you can learn things like frame data. He does not do a lot, if any, lows whatsoever. However, this does not mean that you won't get slaughtered, because he can throw. He just doesn't necessarily throw often. Certain people's version of the bot may throw less. But just defending against this bot generally results in taking a ton of chip damage and eventually just literally getting chipped to death. So he's effectively on a timer. If you don't get much chances, if he just keeps up the pressure and you don't either get out of it, dash away, if you reversal him off you, he definitely can just chip you to death. It's okay, therefore, to punish things like his regular Hadoken, stomps, and so on, purely to keep some control of the match. And of course to increase the amount of times that he does things that are really obvious. He spends a lot of time dashing up. Feel free to check these dashes as well with a light or a light combo. But we made sure that none of these things are required or vital for fighting the bot. In terms of the learning process, you can just learn to fight the bot while just holding down back and watching for a very long time. Eventually, he will defeat you, but you can definitely learn some things. Similarly, since he does have his V gauge basically constantly, he is able to use his Misogi to cancel out of many things, add even more chip damage, stick to you even more, and avoid playing footsies in situations where you feel as if you have some control, which isn't a thing that will come up often if you are fighting this character in actual matches. You can similarly poke him with, let's say, Karin's stand medium kick. She has quite long buttons for this, in the hopes of making him do an uppercut, making him randomly do something else, and so on. But you're counting on the fact that at the very least he will occasionally do his critical art, the uppercutting one. And when he does that move, you should do some punish and go for the meaty after the punish. This also forces you to increase your awareness, because if you are used to the idea of be reversaling in certain situations because you see this move coming, you will partially lose your chances for points.
And make
But
it
if you
caught
don't
like
do
I
it,
just did and get hit by the Demon Super instead.
Similarly, if you do not ever do that, eventually you will find yourself at no health, see it coming, and then realize, oh wait, I need to be reversal this or I'm going to die by chip, and then you die. Note that with a correct version of the bot, this will usually happen anyway, because he often cancels this out of an overhead stomp. And the V-reversal timing for that is very complicated. It is possible to V-reversal the stomp in such a way that he will not hit you with the rest of this uppercut, but the timing is extremely difficult. There may be versions of the bot's timing inputs that end up with this not being too difficult, but we also don't expect this to be a big problem overall, since most of the time you don't want to punish it. Well, you don't want to V-reversal it. And in the end, the person with the more difficult V-reversal timing who still manages the V-reversal is benefiting. So you shouldn't worry if your bot doesn't have this ability, as it's a loss to you, yes, but not a hugely critical one for the point of the bot itself.
And for some just inputs of the bot, variations by just how you put it in, it is possible to V-reversal after the super on reaction to the freeze and get under his non-demon super, at least for some characters. So you can see if your bot allows you to do that. Although I don't know if you will get all of your opponents to let you do that.
So far we've been looking at a character with some relatively canned movies. A basic known structure for how she intends to play neutral and so on. She's also relatively quick at moving around, has some good neutral jump buttons into combos and so on. So it's not too difficult, either spacing wise or awareness wise, to do this with Karine at first anyway. Especially now that she has some changes to her stuff for Season 4. And you basically know how this thing will go or how this other thing will go because of these shifts. The hardest part for a character like this is the fact that he's so pressury in your face lockdown style that she can eventually run out of meter to keep him off with. But in this case, since Kazuki Dynasty is not really doing that, and we don't necessarily suggest spending a ton of meter on your own EX reversals or anything, generally, this isn't too complicated. It's just either hard or exactly what it's supposed to be. Stressful in the sense of keeping your mind on many things at once. She is, however, a character who has a little more trouble with various punishes of the Shungokusatsu in jump backs or cross ups or similar things. But even then, she still has most of the tools required without any overcomplication involved in this whole thing. Finishing her combos is probably the hardest part.
Indeed, especially since the way some of the spacings work out for that jump back punish and some other things, you can end up getting the start of your combo and being just out of range for the finishers.
But therefore, we will now, after one more, move on to Bison. And talk a little bit about the contrast and how to make use of the bot in that way. We contrast because Bison is a charged character, obviously. And Kage in V-Trigger 2 is not super stressful on charged characters, but he does have a bit more potential to lock them down, as many of the better punishes for his stuff will more or less be giving up all that charge you spent so long building up, and means that you often have to check his dash a lot more on charged characters. Similarly, Bison has much less invincibility and much trickier specific combos dependent on things like how much meter is available and so on. We're not going to change the meter in this case, but it's definitely possible. And we will change around some buttons. But that's just different player, different settings. So one quick button check. Charge characters like Bison also have a slightly different problem, but it depends on which charge character you were talking about. The main reason it's important here is because the Stomp Kick is in fact an overhead, the ES version, and really only the ES version. So in some cases you want to hold on to it, and in some cases you don't. Making it even more complicated as a whole. Bison's good punishes more or less involve continuing to hold down back, even though the move that is hitting looks like it should be an overhead. But when it is actually an overhead, because that is possible, obviously he must stand. So even though the aim is obviously, hey, jump out of this ES version entirely, it is also to help keep your mind separate and have you think about the fact that these moves should be mentally viewed differently altogether, which is really important on character like Bison. Bison's great range on his jump heavy kick and the good cross-up hitbox on jump medium kick means that the jump back punishes for the Shungo Kusatsu are not that hard relative to how some other characters have it. But dealing with the scrambles that this character can cause is a lot rougher, particularly because of Bison's relatively slower walk speed and tendency to stay crouching long enough to change his own hitbox relative to certain combos into the Shungo Kusatsu. For other characters, if they happen to be walking back when Kage hits the light kick, something about the block stun means that he'll float forward without ever actually grabbing them. Characters that crouch a lot more, for some reason, seem to not get away. We haven't absolutely confirmed this character has basically been out for a week, but it does definitely seem to be at least partially like this. On top of all that though, making sure that you have your meaties going in and on Bison, that is usually easy, but that's more so for the crush counter one. When you actually manage to avoid the Shungo Kusatsu and hit him, Bison has some pretty spacing dependent combos in that regard. Meaning that your awareness of exactly whether or not your combo went off correctly and so on has a much bigger effect than it does on, say, Kareem. Kage also does not spend too much time hitting various forms of back rise or even quick rise. So fortunately we have another bot who can do a lot of wake up options, but they're approximately even. There's no direct bias. Even though obviously you'd think, well, he has the medium punch. Medium punch, light punch in one input, so it should be a little bit more than the others, but for the most part it doesn't turn out to be that way too often. When you do knock him down, he seems to have approximately the same chance of quick rising, bat rising, and rising without either of those things. Meaning that the autopilot on this is even harder to maintain. You can't just say, well, okay, now it's time for that, so here we go. And as of course you've just seen a little bit ago, the entire point of bots like this is that they can just wake up with supers and similar things to make you miserable. They're there to stress you out, to make you have that feeling of, this is always a possibility. I could be really close to getting my points. I have to go for the meaty to get the points. But maybe not this time. But back to talking about Bison's jump back. He's one of the few characters where jumping back, even when Kage is close, may be superior to just not jumping straight up and going for things related to cross-up style ones. Obviously the point is to keep your mind as occupied as possible with all the little strange things Kage can do. And this is actually partially why we suggested leaving in or putting in the jumps. You don't have to anti-air him, but it helps add some things to your mental stat to push you as close to your autopilot, as close to your stress state as possible. See if you can get to avoid all these little things he does. Therefore, it's perfectly fine if, as mentioned, you choose to do things like check his dashes, hit him from long range with things, keep him out with your footsie buttons. All these things are fine because in the end, you're really just waiting for him to do things so that you can get your own setups. You can either do this by letting him beat you up, or you can do it by preemptively poking him with, for example, Bison's strong stand medium kick, or similar. Bison's also one of the few characters that can back jump out of the ES stomp kick and still hit him, but landing the combo from that hit is difficult enough that we didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about whether or not this is valid as a point. Therefore, leave it up to yourself. As a player, do you feel as if this point is a valid point or not? Entirely up to you. Similarly, if you know that your character does not have a good meaty or does not have a safe meaty off of a certain knockdown, part of the training of this is recognizing maybe I don't want to use that combo, maybe I need, for whatever reason, to have a setup. The ability to train yourself to do a meaty, or rather to do a combo that leads into a setup, even when it isn't your normal one, purely because you've noted, well, this opponent always wakes up with buttons, and if I could get a good meaty, I'd beat them. They don't have enough meter, but they're still going to want to mash out. All those sorts of little things matter a lot in matches, and that level of awareness is built up through practice. So of course, this is how we offer that practice. Note that we'll only be shifting him to V-Trigger 1 at the end of the stream for a short demo of how that tends to go. So if for any reason you were interested in seeing that, you can probably come back in pretty much 40 minutes to an hour. Depending on how long we spend on each character. Or if you're watching this on YouTube later, just skip at least 40 minutes forward. Note that Kage's V-skill is armored, but in this V-trigger, he cannot make it advantaged. It cannot be plus. What you do about this is up to you. And he can definitely space it, and is actually, the bot is somewhat built to space it, so that you can't really do that much about it. But generally in terms of frame data numbers, you shouldn't be expecting a lot of problems. His spacing is also not such that you will probably be dropping too many of your actual combos, but you will still start to get a sense for it at certain points. Similarly, he can deny you points simply by, as mentioned before, back rolling out of some of your stuff. And you can somewhat learn to tell that. Most characters with variable meaties cannot directly determine whether or not they should go for the meaty entirely by waiting for the back roll. What they should do is generally, if they need to dash up, they should dash at least once anyway, and you can build up from there the skill to recognize that the back roll has happened, and then either dash back out, go into defensive position, or whatever else you find is better. Building up the reaction to see whether or not your opponent did the back roll in the middle of your forward dash. It takes a while, but this bot is definitely one you can train this on if you need it. Similarly, things like screen space positioning, they don't factor in as much, and probably don't affect the character overall, but there's still stuff you can learn. You can even easily see the difference in defensive skill here. We've gone through as usual, had everyone fight it. As usual, just fine, and Amara basically never get hit by ES Stomp, and Kazuki Dynasty and I get stomped on all the time. Generally, if our defensive players get hit by ES Stomp, it's probably because they were actually trying to do something. Another thing this is useful for teaching you, similar to a few of our other bots, specifically Boxer, and at least one other who's not coming to mind immediately, is that neutral jump combos are actually slightly different for a lot of characters. Sometimes the moves are the same, but the timing is slightly different. And other times, the combo itself is entirely different because of something to do with the spacing. So it's important to keep those things in mind as well when dealing with various things that Kage does. And this is something that's going to be very important in matches as well. Being able to recognize how high you were when you hit, which button you use during a neutral jump, particularly ones where the character is passing under you in that slow, controlled way that the Shungo Satsu causes, means you occasionally have those moments of, wait, which side am I on? And for a charge character, this is super important, as if you mess this up midway, you can be in big trouble. For certain characters with command normals, like down-forward command normals, such as Falk and Chun-Li, you may completely mess yourself up by doing the entirely wrong combo, simply by thinking you are on one side and being on the other side. So it can help you build up this as well as part of the whole process. Depending on how you've input your Kagebot, he may or may not have dash-up throw. Generally, the faster you can do the half-circle forward motions after a dash, the more likely he is to have this move, as the half-circle will be hidden completely in the dash, meaning that when he does buffer it, he won't necessarily buffer into a move. As he only functionally has one quote-unquote throw input, this is really important. But again, he doesn't really need to be able to throw that much, and doing it the other way will just cause him to whiff throw a neutral even more, so you might not actually care. It's generally enough that it's in there just enough times to make you go, oh wait, I forgot he could do that. Just add a little stress and spice to your life. Well, a little more.
Side note, be careful of putting your V timer on infinite instead of normal, since that will deny you the ability to train the V reversal part of it.
So at the end of this one, we will switch character once again, another little button check. And the associated shift. Then we'll go into a character with even more very clean, canned meaties, but with a different set of air options. Karin's options for the jump backs and similar are relatively strong and don't vary too much. Cammy, on the other hand, is a bit rougher. Not a ton, but enough that you'd notice. Generally, characters who have to use light buttons for their cross-ups have a little bit more trouble with this sort of thing for multiple reasons, really. Amount of block stun difference, combos that they can or cannot do from them, and so on. Cammy, therefore, has it relatively easier once she has gotten the crash counter punish, but certain neutral jump stuff and the Shungo Kusatsu punish are likely to be harder. The meaties themselves, probably not too bad, but she's also a relatively squishy character, meaning that every time you do go for the meaty and turn out to be wrong, you're probably going to get hurt a lot more, relatively speaking, and reduce your chance of actually getting all the way to 10 points. In the case of Cammy in particular, therefore, since she has generally standard combos, we will in fact change her V gauge and CA gauge to normal. This is, again, technically only the extreme difficulty would actually do this. You generally don't want to do this, but the bot is not specifically telling you, hey, you should use your meters at full. Use your meters at whatever you want. Whatever helps you most with awareness or punishes or similar. But in this case we do it to show off certain things because Cammy doesn't have a whole lot of things she relies on meter for in terms of defense or in terms of meaties. He's also a character who can be very stressful. To players like Kansuki Dynasty and characters like Cammy, because Kage doesn't really need to play a lot of footsies. He's not Colleen level with that parry and neutral thing, but he's definitely not a character that has to spend a lot of time in the footsies. And when his V trigger is active, he has to do even less of it. Cammy therefore gets her better options against him by doing things like anti-airing. Because if she attempts to just play footsies in the standard way, it tends to get a little more difficult. Generally because it changes her spacing and makes her punishes more difficult to land, and timings related to those things. But you can already see a bit of it. Cammy's jumping that heavy kick and combos thereof. There's a lot more dependency on where exactly she was standing when Kage began various moves. She's also one of the characters that doesn't do as well with going straight for a meaty after a forward dash. Even though functionally it's pretty easy to do, you still have to spend a bit more time recognizing that your opponent did quick rise or back row. And while he does not do it much, Kagebot, like most bots of this type, can sometimes just wake up blocking. While this doesn't strictly make your life difficult for most people, Cammy and Cammy players have a higher tendency than most to finish combos in unsafe ways when they aren't as sure about the meaty. In other words, once you're stressed enough to be thinking about this, you're used to the opposing player waking up with something. And whatever meaty you went for is a matter of confirming or not confirming. But in the situation where they woke up blocking in particular setups, if you're stressed enough, you may find yourself finishing the combo in question and becoming unsafe at the end. As you can see here, there's also a shift in understanding how much block stun you were in when the cancel into the Shungo Satsu happened. But generally it doesn't mean you get to stay on the ground. For most positions, if you decided to stay on the ground, you would still get grabbed by the very last active frames of the move. Meaning you have to jump, but because you get pushed so far back before you can jump, the back jump is now incorrect. So you can build up a little understanding of this for your own future. By slowly getting used to this difference. You'll want to neutral jump in those situations, even though it feels as if this is a spacing where you might want to back jump. Because generally you want to back jump when he is close to you so that you can more or less land on his head after he's advanced. And neutral jump if he was decently far out when he did it for whatever reason, or you were moving backward at the time. But again, for Cammy in particular, this becomes even more difficult because you have to not only make that decision, but recognize where he is in time to hit the correct button. As mentioned before, that point system B, the neutral jump out of his stomp, is not really about reactability. It's actually partially supposed to raise the difficulty for players who find themselves too simply following instructions. If you neutral jump a lot in order to get out of this, you will also notice some differences in how the bot behaves, ranges that you can do things from that you might not have thought about otherwise. But you will also suffer more in particular situations. If he's just coming straight up to you. Know that if you find this to be particularly strange or difficult, or your version of the bot does not work too well, I personally suggest taking, instead of that point, checking his dash and doing a combo from that. But it helps if you are the sort of player who has that as an actual ability, and not just, okay, I guess I'll get my points by mashing this button until he runs into it. You should use it however best suits you, in that way. So make sure that it is definitely something you already feel like you understand. Part of the reason for doing it with the stomp kick, for example, is that which side of him you end up on after the neutral jump relative to the stomp kick, even if you just jumped over as a read, will depend on the range he was at, and it will once again force you to think about, should I hit my cross-up button or not?
So now something about the EX kick escape point that I had not necessarily thought about before, but I'd like to check, because it's probably useful to other people too, is I somewhat naturally react to manage to hold up just like standard back block to it, but not necessarily always jump. And I have been trying to take this and go straight to up instead of to back, which requires a slightly different set of muscle memory. And so I realized that proximity block might allow me to use back without ending up doing a back jump. Do you happen to know if that is acceptable, or if your inputs would need to be cleaner to get the best punish for that sort of move?
Functionally, it doesn't matter. The way that the inputs work in this game, as far as I'm aware, yeah, for the most part, you should already be able to do that. And this is also why I'm not worried about this messing with people's muscle memory too much, as most of the time, if you see this move coming, you're going to drift through back in order to get to up. Because you were already at down back, probably. And if you were not at down back, then because of the standard way that people think, for most people, it's easier to just jump straight up than it is to do anything else. This again depends on whether or not you play charged characters and so on. Or whether or not you're the sort of person that goes for uppercut in those situations. But, as a whole, if you find that this is either messing with your muscle memory, or that you don't understand the way that the game registers certain inputs, you should definitely not spend too much time getting the point, or trying to get the point, from that neutral jump. There are just certain characters who benefit from neutral jumping in that situation, even when it isn't necessarily the kick. And some that need to get out of this situation because even when it is the kick is -8, so you can definitely punish it. They'll be expecting Kage to do this from longer ranges where, yeah, you could punish it, but what would you get? And so on. There's definitely some nuance in here, and that point system is built up around understanding the nuance in question. Therefore, don't take it as just, hey, do this. But once again, Cammy has shown us a lot of Cammy things. And therefore we are moving on to our next character.
And since we don't actually have the... we were planning to do Jiri, but since we don't have that, I suppose we can possibly go to either Ibuki or just skip on ahead. I got a little
Well, then,
distracted
Ibuki
during
is
planning as to which account.
Ibuki is definitely next. Ibuki's little changes really don't matter much here. We are intentionally now moving a bit more into the characters for whom our players don't know as many meaties or don't feel as comfortable with them. One or the other.
I can indeed confirm that I don't think I remember any Ibuki meaties, even if I did in fact learn them at some point. So onward to experiment then.
Ibuki is also a character with more precise inputs in a lot of places. Meaning that you need to understand the spacing that you're at fairly well to know which of your combos is optimal, or even sometimes which of your combos land. Now while she's not quite as squishy as Cammy as far as I remember, she's still quite squishy. And often tends to put herself in trouble. In other words, she's a technical character where if you make mistakes, the punishment is usually swift and brutal. Fortunately, she does have some good target combos to make it a little bit easier to get certain punishes. Basically, recognizing that you're in a position where this target combo will hit and using that. And through that, building up an understanding of when you are not in target combo position and therefore going to something entirely different. Whereas with some characters you go mostly the same and only change it a little at the end. Given what Ibuki's target combos are, most of us can say fairly early into the animation of the previous move, oh yeah, this is not going to work, and therefore just go for something else. Since she is not really as much of a footsies character, one that tends to be subconsciously tempted to stay closer to the opponent, meaning that you're more likely to get hit by certain things. You can use some training here, such as watching his meter, recognizing whether or not he has V-trigger active, and so on, to determine how far away you should stand if you don't intend to go for meaties, or when you should dash away from him, or similar things. As with all bots, the rhythm is likely to be very slightly different based on how far away your character stands. So you're seeing here a lot more uppercuts, a lot more strange cancels, and so on, as the times Kage gets poked, it shifts in his rhythm. All these things are very slightly different than they would be on a different character. Ibuki has many more situations in which she can comfortably reach and interrupt certain things Kage does. But at other times she ends up close, defending but close, meaning that his normals tend to hit and are blocked instead of whiffing, resulting in different rhythms. This is something you have to get used to in bots quite often, just as you have to get used to it in players. But bots are good at helping you understand more so the why this happens. Your opponent does not have to be doing something different in order for the match to change when you change character. They could be doing exactly the same things, literally exactly the same things, and just some difference in inputs, some difference in where you tend to go after certain motions, how far away you stand, and therefore what gets blocked or not blocked. All these things influence how a match goes, both in terms of scrambles and decision making. But with a bot, you can be sure that it is just scrambles and randomness, and not decision making, as the bot is clearly making no actual decisions. As someone who's used to this sort of thing, for example, I can tell you that the bot is currently doing most of what it is doing because of the fact that Ibuki is often close enough to be hit by and end up blocking its crouching, or is it back heavy punch? I don't remember we were having a crouching one, so it probably must be back heavy punch.
We do have a back heavy punch.
But it's an overall understanding. The back heavy punch in this case pushes at a different range, encounters Ibuki at a different spacing than it did for Kami and similar, and results in a lot of shifts because he's constantly in block stun for this move, and this causes different moves he does to come out at different times. You'll notice that for the most part, once he does block, once he is not blocked, he will tend to jump after this. But if he is blocked, generally he won't end up doing this at all, and you'll get some other move come out. Similarly, he tends to be a little further away from her when doing Stomp and V-Skill, meaning that there's a lot of little extra shifts in there too. The Shungokusatsu input itself is also helpful for just making you nervous in neutral. He'll just poke at the air a little bit, make you think maybe you can whiff punish, get a hit in, and so on. But this is also helpful enough to be distracting. If you are a player that really wants some lows in here and don't feel as if there's any way to get them easily, you can try putting them in basically in either action 2 or 1 while you are doing your half circle forward motion. Try to do it so that when you are holding down back, for a moment you actually hit a medium kick. This is all we can offer you. Anything else is asking quite a lot and would probably break the rhythm of the bot quite a lot as well. But I'm decently sure that that would work. Still, as this bot is more so about meaties than making yourself deal with the high-low mix-up, it definitely isn't required. So at the end of this one, we'll be moving on to Rainbow Mika and to the promised V-Trigger 1. Since the style of punish of the Shungokusatsu that Mika is capable of approximates to that of Kami, so we don't really need to show it off or talk about it there. She also has some fairly long distance combos, making it relatively easy to get through certain situations. I mean, you don't have to worry as much in most places. What's harder is getting the meaties after those combos due to the spacing. But we're going to see that one way or the other. So, we'll be using V-Trigger 1 for Kage in this case. And you'll get to see both how it works with this bot and why we don't recommend it. After, of course, our usual button check and change. We should probably also give Mika back her meter, as most of what you'd want to do with her in this matchup is at least somewhat dependent on it. Ibuki and Kami could be demonstrated more easily without it, but Mika should have hers back probably. So, obviously, the main thing that disappears with V-Trigger 1 is the Shungokusatsu itself. But we also lose the Misogi. It's more of a pressure tool than anything else though, so it's not as vital. What you will notice is that when he's in V-Trigger 1, his V-Skill changes. V-Skill, Armored / Parry, whatever, becomes a very different move. It becomes advantaged on block, can be spaced differently, reaches a little further, and so on. If you just want to get used to Kage as a character with this and the little teleports he gets, there's not a lot of particularly impressive teleport shenanigans in this bot. And we may at some point in the future come up with one that does more of it, but as so far we have seen, most of those are true mix-ups, i.e. there's no way to train yourself directly. And no visibility tells like with Zangief's new Lariat mix-ups and so on. So you're just guessing, and you don't need a bot to teach you to guess. However, you can use it to get used to the idea and flow of his teleportations. Fortunately for us, the bot automatically changes rhythm when he has this V-trigger, meaning it's more likely that he will do things related to the teleport that he wasn't doing before. But you're not likely, if at all, to see the cool aerial teleport into combo things that he actually has. What you will get is a bit more uppercuts because he's generally not V-canceling in specific situations. And similar, you'll get more throws. So you can use this to get used to looking at or looking for his V-Trigger 1 enhanced V-Skill, the spacings this creates, and blocking correctly when you're having issues with his teleportation. Similarly, you can use some awareness of whether or not he's actually in that form or not, and therefore whether or not you even have to expect other uses of it or options. We actually rather suggest that you try to make sure to get the jumps in when it comes to this version, as it helps him stay out of trouble in certain situations. We do not suggest that you particularly change the point system. As noted, you will be able to get more points in certain ways and lost in other ways, but because of the change in his rhythm, it tends to sort of even out. Basically, until you get to the hard difficulty, you will still always get the points for the meaty that follows the uppercut. So, as long as if he's just doing more uppercuts, you're fine. You will probably be able to punish those moves and therefore get to attempt more meaties. But of course, defending against this version of the bot is much easier, as you never have to worry about being hit by a more or less invincible 30% damage grab. Still, it's definitely not useless, and if you are feeling in the mood for just something different, testing your skill against him differently, or got bored of losing to Demon Super, there you go. For command throw characters, it would generally seem to be easier. You just dash up and do your throw meaty or not. He's not going to tech out of most of them. But he does have, again, that difference in wake-up timings, first of all, and a couple of odd behaviors built into him that make it a little more difficult to do. Since he does in fact have a light uppercut, we made sure to work that in with the specific interactions between actions 2 and 3. To be honest, we don't actually know which of his uppercuts is throw invincible, so we just made sure he had all of them. He can, however, still just wake up throw. So he can tech out of your throws, and he is, again, suggested that you give him a lot of jumps compared to the other where it's less required, precisely so that this happens. He can jump out of your wake up throw pressure. This is important because teleports are generally not throw invincible. So it's not as if him waking up with the teleport is necessarily going to resolve the problem. At least for him. But if nothing else, the hardest part of this, from the command grab character side, is getting used to the idea that he may simply not wake up quickly at all. His ability to just not quick rise, or even back roll, can be somewhat stressful if you are focusing on everything else and then finally going, okay, I'm here to practice Mihi's, but my opponent keeps on not getting up that way. Obviously, you can build up other Mihi's around the idea that your opponent has not done that, but not everyone is great at this. And his armor, as well as his teleport, help to deal with certain cross-up ones and certain specific safe jump style ones. In fact, he is the type that's likely to make you think about the fact that he is not generally waking up with quick rise and then going into buttons or whatever. Which is itself distracting from your Mihis, because you get into the mental state of thinking he's not going to quick rise, what should I do? And then he does, and you're lost. But again, this isn't really that different. This is more so us letting you know that if you want him to not use that particular V-trigger, you probably need to make sure he has the jumps. Because, at least in the other case, if he wakes up with a jab and your timing was off, that jab has a decent chance of leading to dying instantly. Whereas in this form, you'll just get poked a little bit, and it will really not be that threatening. So, once again, a minor, we'll shift him back to be trigger 2, just to get a little bit of time demonstrating this with Mika. With a few more natural punishes. And some associated meaty attempts anyway.
having played against this bot for a little bit, I have noted that he helps me with a few different things that other bots definitely can do, but the point system of this bot lets you focus more on the ranges of the punishes involved. So first of all, because he hits low less, I'm basically more rewarded to just stand. Which made me realize that a lot of the max range confirms that I thought I needed to train the execution of and getting that to click in my brain, it turned out that actually I could confirm those, but because I'm busy defending usually and crouching, my reaction time is just a little too slow to do the mental confirm required. So, that was the first interesting note that I had. And it can always be good to, as a defensive player, occasionally play against a bot that requires offense for that exact sort of reason. To figure out if something is a mindset thing or if it's executional. The other thing that Kagebot has been forcing me to do is the aforementioned further spaced punishes, since in order to most effectively punish him and get the most damage, I have to stand at a very particular spacing. And it's not easy to maintain because of how far forward all of Kage's specials take him. So I found that while training meaties, he was good for learning and refining the spacing at which your meaties tend to leave you at. Especially with Mika, who has punishes that can leave her opponent at fairly decently far ranges. That's a fairly useful thing to train. The other thing was, and this is something that you can do on a lot of different bots, but this one just happened to inspire me to figure it out, was that I could just use this bot to train my V-trigger activation in reaction to a Shoryuken that is long, like Akuma's and Kage's and even Ken's. You can do this with a lot of different types of crush counterable moves, but Kage inspired me to get better at that, so I have been using him to focus on that on top of my meaty stuff, since it allows... Just his weirdness of movement allows you to train a lot of different situations that I can't normally get on most bots, but overall that's been fun, at least for me, to tinker around a bit. And finally, I can say that Kagebot has helped me just generally recognize when to go on offense. As Rillian said, and has been explaining throughout, Kagebot varies his rise timing like all our other meaty bots. And when you combine this with the just sheer amount of stickiness he has compared to some of our other meaty bots, it can lead to you learning a different type of defense, which is doing nothing. This is something a defensive player might be familiar with, but still, it's a good thing to train.
This has been a relatively longer stream for a mostly simple bot, but this is because he has so many uses. Therefore, we will end it by switching to Sakura. And showing this off because she is one of the characters with the most stress in terms of dealing with Kage. She has a lot of very tight, specific confirms that sometimes he's in range for the move, sometimes he's not in range for the move, sometimes he's in the range to get hit by the first thing but not the confirm. She has good jump back stuff, but not necessarily combos out of all that stuff. And so on. There's a lot of little pieces of Sakura's game plan that, despite her being a mostly now improved footsie and pressure character in the realm of Karine and Cammy, she does have some different things she needs to do in order to be very effective in exchange for the slightly better footsie she normally has. Kage pushes on this a lot. She has slightly more command normals, slightly more specifics for her combo timings from neutral jumps. Slightly more difficult crush counter punishes. At least the good ones. And even variable timings on some of those. Of the characters likely to be spending a lot of time facing Kagebot, at least from Kansuki Dynasty side, she's probably quite high on the list, even with her new shifts and improvements as a character. Getting all of it down pat to the point where you are confident you can do it in most situations is definitely something that this bot will help push on. Since so much more awareness and precision of ranges ends up being required. Similarly, she has slightly harder keys at the end of many of the knockdowns related to these things. In fact, the more damaging Sakura's punish is, as a general rule, the harder any meaty is to get off of them. Overall, though, there's not that much to say, at least not from my side. Most of it really is for Sakura players. Putting in that hard work, making sure that everything that they need to be able to do on demand, they can in fact do. But not a whole lot of specifics that need to be explained, per se. Just a lot of things that you have to just do. Therefore, we're basically coming to the end of today's stream. We were not necessarily planning to stream for the holiday season, and will not be having more streams until basically the new year. Specifically, our next stream is likely to be Old Year's Night, Monday the 31st. And even that is not absolutely assured, but we should almost certainly be back somewhere within that week. And you can check our Twitter @2_MK_FGC for updates on that. Probably the next time you see us tweet will be the next time you see us stream, unless there is some question that needs to be answered through Twitter regarding this bot or any other. Of course, you can always send questions to that Twitter account or use our contact page at 2-mk.org if you have more in-depth questions. As mentioned before, Kagebot itself can be found at 2-mk.org/kage-bot, and all bots can be found at 2-mk.org/bots. As a generality, if you're interested in the BBFZ ones, BBFZ bots. Navigation should get you through as needed though. So you can go there to get all of the inputs if you don't want to use the stream as reference, at least during the input part. And obviously, there are some videos there to help with individual inputs, as we have not necessarily shown them off in the way you'd expect. It's our standard, but not necessarily one that is that helpful unless you keep on playing over the same part of the stream over and over again. You've solved this problem by putting them in specific small instruction videos. Therefore, no next stream specifically. You'll hear about it on our Twitter. Therefore, enjoy your holidays and Season 4. This is Marillion along with Just Fine and Kanzuki Dynasty. 14 to MK. Good luck with your training, and good night everyone.